So, thanks for coming today. My name is Mike Facemire, and I'm an analyst at a place called Forrester Research. So you probably heard developers talk all day or development type folks. Don't run out just because I'm an analyst. I'm not completely bad. But before I get started, I'm supposed to tell everybody to wear your badges to the Xamarin Southern Barbecue at the Freight Depot tonight. I'll remind you again at the end. Good deal. So, as I said, I'm not completely bad, but we'll start out by saying, who am I? So I'm a computer engineer. I graduated from a place called Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio, and have been writing mobile stuff for a long, long time. But even before that, this is what I wrote code on way back when. And if you're familiar with these things, the top one is a TRS-80, or affectionately the Trash 80. And then a Commodore 64. That's where I started writing little dumb games where worms move through mud and things like that. Then I moved on, and once I graduated, started doing this type of thing. I built apps on Pocket PC, Palm Pilot, Windows CE, and then at the end of my professional coding career, maybe not the end, the current stopping point, I was doing a lot of mobile development for IBM in their social software. So what we're going to do here today is talk about where mobile is in the enterprise and what kind of trends that I'm seeing. So my current job allows me to be an analyst in this space, to talk to folks just like you, talk to development leads, business folks in all of the major businesses on the planet and find out what they're doing with mobile, what they're not doing in mobile. And we're going to talk about a lot of those things here, as well as some of the direction I see going forward and where they're going. So my hope is when we're done here, you have a pretty good idea of what the enterprise is doing, and if you're in one already, maybe you'll say, we've been doing that for a long time. Maybe you'll say, that's crazy, our folks will never get there. But the net of it is, if at the end you want to chat some more, I do this stuff because I love it. So feel free to hit me up and I'll have my information at the end. So with that, let's talk about the future of the SDLC, or the software development lifecycle, as I see it. To do that, take a look at what challenges companies and enterprises are facing today when it comes to mobile. So part of my job is to sit at my desk with a headset on and look like a telemarketer or something and answer half-hour calls from our clients, and they call in and ask about anything. And so there are 4 trends that I see across that. With regards to doing mobile. Number one, how do I get access to data? And not only how do I get access to that data, and when I say data, I mean like your database, your DB2 data, your line of business data, SAP data. In all honesty, SAP data is probably one of the biggest ones that people try to get access to. And then after having an awesome experience, they call me and say, how can I do that a little bit better next time? So how do I get access to data, and how do I get it in a way that works on mobile devices? Because those of you that have built mobile apps understand that passing SOAP packets back and forth to mobile devices is probably not the best idea, unless you like burning up batteries and things like that. Number 2 is, how do I secure that data over the wire and on the device once it gets there? So data at rest, data in motion. How do I do that type of security stuff? Number 3, what do I actually use to develop apps from a client-side perspective? You know, I hear about native, I hear about web, I hear about things like Xamarin, and the awesome thing is, about 2012, late 2012, I started getting calls of folks saying, I've heard about this Xamarin thing. Is it real? Is that a thing I should know about? Or should I keep, cracking the whip and having folks write Objective-C and Java? And at that point, like I said, I'm a developer, so I do what developers do. I go to Stack Overflow. And I said, let's do a tag search on Stack Overflow and see, at that point I had to combine Mono plus Xamarin. And I said, so all the other options that you're giving me are pretty similar in activity as Xamarin. So way back in 2012, when I started hearing about it, I said, yes, I'm very, very bullish, and it's awesome when I can be right. And so that's why I'm really happy to be here today, because y'all didn't let me down. So thank you, because I'm wrong plenty of times. And so then the last thing I hear about is how, as an organization, can we actually deliver apps fast enough? The business is asking for us to create experiences for them on mobile devices, and they're asking about it a lot more than they ever did with the web, a whole lot more than they ever did with client server, and they want it like tomorrow or oftentimes yesterday. And I think back to when I was doing professional development at IBM, and our software development life cycle was anywhere between 12 and 18 months long. And we would sit up there and come up with all these requirements, and then the designers would draw pictures and do their thing, while us developers would chill out and learn, i.e. take long lunches and go home early and things like that, and play Doom on the internal LAN. But fast forward to today, the business is now asking for development of mobile to be done in 2 months, maybe 3 to 4 months max. And back in the day when you said, no, you'll get it when we're done, that's when they got it, because there were really not many other options. Today, when they say we need it yesterday or we need it ASAP, when you say no, trust me, they are calling folks like me. They're calling their business partners. I have a lot of conversations with CMOs and line of business execs calling me saying, hey, our folks say it's going to take 8 months to do this. Can you give me a list of 5 shops that will do it instead? So if you're here and you run a development shop, that's awesome, because they are calling, and they are very, very willing to work with you. The net of all of this is none of this matters unless you can do it right now. It's got to be done quickly. And that's kind of what's helping to define where the modern SDLC is going. So a colleague of mine and myself did some research on 5-star mobile apps. So apps that were in the App Store that had 4.5 or 5-star apps, and try to get some commonalities across them. And the biggest one was how many times per year those folks released to the App Store. And the baseline was roughly 6. At least 6 times a year they were putting apps out into the App Store, all the way up to we interviewed a few folks that were putting apps out between 20 and 24 times a year, or putting updates out 20 to 24 times a year. Now, I go into corporate development shops and tell them this, and I get some really funny looks when they think, how in the world am I going to change my deployment processes, my development processes, to be able to ship even this quick, even 6 times a year? And that's only once every other month. But as you see here, it's not a new major release. It's sometimes updates, regressions pop in, new devices get put out, and I need to quickly address that device. Or our favorite one is the once a year Android and iOS update that we all get to deal with. I caught the part of the last talk when they were talking about the changes in iOS 7. And as a developer myself, those are days that I like sitting at my new desk and not my old desk and having to deal with somebody else screwing with my stuff. So with that in mind, we take a look back and say, well, in the past we would do enterprise development by coming up with a list of 70 requirements and these buckets of test cases and we would only ship when we actually implemented 68 of those 70 requirements, and we had 98.6% test coverage. And then for the other 1.4, we had waivers signed that say this isn't going to kill somebody if we release the software, and we promise we'll fix it at some point. That doesn't work anymore. It simply takes too long, and if you think that at the beginning of a software process, you know what your users want to the level that you can have 70-some requirements, and then take that amount of time and push it out, you will be out of business very, very quickly. So many of our clients are struggling with that change of how to get things out quicker, because instead of taking all that time and putting it out, what we are starting to see is this type of cycle where we define our objectives, define the core thing that we want our app to do. The core thing, not here's what our current website does and we need to take all of that and jam it down into a little device, but we want to figure out the core thing we want to do and work on that. But as we work on it, we have to establish the KPIs, the key performance indicators, or business imperatives, what I like to call the business success points. What should this app do to benefit the business, to increase revenue, decrease cost, or increase efficiency? Those are generally the three things that enterprise apps or enterprise mobile apps do. Establish those metrics, and then build, in lean terminology, build a minimum viable product. Build exactly that core thing, and any other decisions that come in during the process, if they don't positively impact the KPIs you've done, you don't do them. I'm sure you all are aware of feature creep and scope creep, and that happens when fun-loving executives will come down to a development shop and say, what would be really cool? And whenever I would hear that phrase, what would be really cool, I knew that meant there's some new code coming, there's some more work coming, and it didn't matter if it was needed or not, it's going to be in there. Well, what would be really cool is a bad way to do that, and so that's why I think it's absolutely imperative to have these metrics and make sure that anything you do always relates back to them. So then once you build the minimum viable product or that core thing, quantify the feedback. So one of the other big changes that we're seeing in mobile is now people will tell you if they like your app or not. They'll tell you through App Store reviews. They'll tell you through internal app stores. They'll come up and talk to you and say, hey, your app is awesome, or not so awesome sometimes, never. But you've got to be able to quantify that, because once you quantify it, then you can align it back with the KPIs and then rinse and repeat. And then do all your feature updates based on that as well. So now, this might be a little bit too small to read. This is the other scary thing. As an enterprise developer most of my life, and only doing consumer development on the side when I wanted to play around at night. As an enterprise developer, we never actually heard from our customers because it was so hard to actually go through all the paperwork to this is a bug and this is why we want it fixed and this and that. So as a developer, it never actually got down to me. Now in mobile, that's completely changed. We hear awesome things like, this update is horrible, it messes up bad words itself. Do not download. If you don't fix this, I'm going to send out buttloads of hate. I mean it. Developers, we have huge egos and pride, and that hurts my feelings. I didn't even write this app. And that hurts my feelings. And some of these are just awesome. I'll not take you through them. But if we think about a feedback-driven SDLC, this is what we have to be prepared for, both pro and con. Now, the good thing is there is software and vendor tools out there that are starting to be able to quantify things like this. They go through and do natural language evaluation and determine you will get 0.2 additional stars if you fix this bug or add this feature, and things like that. So those feedback-driven life cycles are driven by quantitative feedback, but this is kind of the painful part that happens every now and again along the road. Now, the other thing that we can do to accelerate the time to development is optimize delivery, optimize the inefficiencies between each of the disciplines of a software development life cycle. So if we think back to the waterfall days where we had business requirements, and then design, then development, some QA, some ops, and things like that. Each of those disciplines was a silo, or I, being a developer, I thought the design part was like this white tower where they all sat and felt enlightened and draw awesome pictures, and they threw it down to us in the valley, and then we worked on it, and then we gave it to the testers, and they were just mean. And we didn't like them because they broke our gorgeous art. Now, moving forward to today, we're starting to see the barriers broken down between QA and dev. In a lot of cases, it's because they're the same person. Folks are doing test-driven development. They're actually caring about the quality of the code they put out. I'm hearing a lot less of the "it works on my machine," which is good. And I'll be honest, I used to use that excuse as well. Because at where I worked, our build processes were so hard, I couldn't build that software. I could build my part, and I could update JSPs and update code. So sometimes we worked around the edges of the SDLC. But knocking down those barriers is absolutely critical. And so like I said, we're seeing it being knocked down between dev and test, but we need to also knock those down between design and dev. And so in that case, we're starting to see a lot more requirements, the ones that are there for that MVP type model, those requirements being completely graphical, and have designers actually use mock-up tools and use frameworks to give us things that actually look like what they should. So that it removes the problem of, well, I thought you meant this, and so that's what I developed, and now we don't have time to do what you wanted, and so nobody's happy. So as much graphical representation that you can have all the way through the process is a good thing. And we're also seeing team structures change as well. When I ran development organizations, my teams were like 15 people large, and I think back to it those days, and I have no idea how we got anything done. Because if I had 15 people writing software, I can keep track of me sometimes, but all of that, that's hard. And I guess I wasn't the only one, because now we're starting to see dev teams be between 3 and 5 people, and having shared resources of product managers and designers and ops people that are shared across all these smaller teams. And for those that use Scrum or any kind of agile methodology, having Scrum of Scrums where leadership of these small teams kind of bubble up to the larger orgs, that's happening a lot more as well. And with regards to the SDLC, I'll wrap it up by saying that we simply don't have time to build everything ourselves anymore either. Composition is really, really taking off. So the Xamarin Component Store is a great example of that. There's no need to build charts and graphs, and no need to build a lot of these core components when they're out there. In a lot of cases, they're out there for free. So when I talk to enterprises, that's probably one of the biggest things that's really starting to set in is they are believing this and starting to use parts of the world that are out there. And it's not only on the front end, it's happening on the back end as well. So if any of you folks have done the ugly back end development, you're familiar with this, an MVC, a model view controller type paradigm, where the model is the data, the controller is the application layer, and the view is what we see. Well, that used to be implemented in these big, giant, monolithic blobs like servlets and other things not to be named that I dealt with way too much. But those are being broken down now as well in the back end. We're starting to see new technologies crop up. So disintermediating the model and the controller are things like Node.js. And then between the controller and the view, technologies like Angular on the front end. And so we're starting to see a lot of new technologies pop up everywhere through the stack to drive componentization. Now, the other thing to talk about is where are folks using mobile? At Forrester, we wrote a book, because that's what we do instead of writing code anymore. We wrote a book called The Mobile Mind Shift, and we say that folks, that you need to address your customers in their mobile moment. So when I pull out my phone, how are you going to satisfy me and make me happy? Right now, the stats say that when somebody pulls out their phone and interacts with your app, they spend roughly 72 seconds doing it. And so what can you do in those 72 seconds? And not only what can you do, but where can you do it? For so long, we've thought of the world as an app-centric world, that the only way to deliver experiences is by writing apps. But I'll tell you, that model is changing a little bit as well, a little bit. It's still an app-centric world today, but we're starting to see cracks in there. Because instead of just having the mobile OS and apps that run on it, we're also starting to see things that come in the OS itself, things like messaging and social and maps. And what Uber just put out an API not too long ago, such that they could integrate in with Google Maps, so now when I do a direction search, Uber will come up as one of the options. So folks are starting to deliver their experience on these type of platforms as well. If we go into the Asia Pacific market, there are apps, social apps like WeChat. And people write a lot of applications built on WeChat so that I can actually reserve tables, make banking transactions by chatting with a bot or with maybe somebody in reality, but it's all done over social networks. So when you think about where I'm going to build my experience, keep in mind that you can do all of these things. And then the last one that I'd be remiss without talking about are things like Siri or Cortana or Google Now. The data that you're creating, the data feeds that you're creating from your enterprise backends will feed long-term, once these folks open up their APIs, will feed into those experiences as well, such that, I can now, I'm an Android guy, so I can pull up and get Google Now and learn about not only the flight that I'm missing, but also about a local restaurant that my friend may have recommended. It's all of those type of data interactions that go through these type of models. So the three places that we see experiences being driven now are an app world, a content world, content like maps and WeChat and things like that, and a services world that I can use my services that we built to feed into these existing platforms. And then finally, there's innovation. We're starting to see payments be one area, and now watches and connected things that are connected to my phone be there. So I'll finish this off by a quote that I love, which is, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed." So many folks will call me and say, "My gosh, we're so far behind. How are we ever going to catch up and do all the things that we see?" Because, as consumers, I pull up Netflix, and I pull up Waze, and I pull up all these awesome apps, and the enterprise looks at that and says, "We're like 3 years behind that." It's cool, because most enterprises are. And so anytime the conversation starts with, "We're so far behind," I always stop them and say, "Probably not," because most of your peers are there as well. But the good thing is that future is not evenly distributed, so I get to talk to the Netflixes of the world and the LinkedIns of the world and find out how they're doing it, how they're building their experiences and their architectures, and kind of doing this type of thing to the enterprises. But with that in mind, the public cloud market is growing very, very quickly. A lot of folks are using it, and even folks that I never thought would use it. Some banks and insurance companies are even using it, which is kind of the high governance folks that generally tend to be laggards there. This is actually a little bit of old data. There's well over 11,000 APIs listed in programmable web. And I call out programmable web because that's the place I go to find out what data is there that I can just plug together and make stuff. I like to gamble, full disclosure. And earlier this year, or late last year, the NFL put out like all of their historical data. And now you can do these awesome regressions on like NFL data. So it's things like that. Data will pop up, folks will innovate on that data, and we can build great things. Agile is widely accepted. I'm not a big proponent of taking the Agile manifesto and putting it on the wall and saying everybody should do this. I actually think it's a terrible thing to do. But take your organization and understand the strengths and weaknesses of, and work with that. And then finally, scale is critical, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So the future of software architectures, performance and scale matter heavily. And that's why we see this new web server, nginx, starting to appear in a lot of places. And in particular, as of, this was the October one, as of October, it's the most popular web server amongst the top 1,000 and the top 10,000 most trafficked websites on the planet. Reason is, for those that aren't familiar with nginx, it's an event-driven asynchronous architecture. It does non-hardware bound, non-IO bound transactions. And so it scales elastically incredibly well. It's non-hardware bound, so it's almost infinite. I would have never thought that Apache and IIS would have gotten blown away by something, and it got blown away very, very quickly. Performance and scale matter heavily. So on the back end, one of the first challenges I mentioned is how do we get access to back end data? What does that look like? Most of the folks in here are probably familiar with these protocols, but the challenge is you've got a lot of disparate applications in the back and a lot of disparate protocols to access those applications. Yet on the front end, mobile apps like to talk these protocols and these architectures like JSON and REST, OAuth for security. And so there's this chasm in the middle that we have to cross. And I'll be honest, I think this is the hardest problem in mobile development. Solving this problem and doing it so that we can do it repeatably is the biggest problem we have to solve. And it's the one that when I ask folks, what budget did you have for your app, and then how much did you end up spending, we see 80% of budgets being spent solving that orange gap, because that's hard stuff. Now, the good thing is we can learn from our mistakes. When I started out as a professional developer at IBM, it was during the dot-com days, and they told me, we need to web enable our data. And so a lot of us did that. Some of us said, okay, we'll just build static HTML and put the data in it. Or we'll create some servlets and have a little bit of a dynamic nature to it. And then finally, some other folks said, well, we'll wrap it in XML and use XSLT and style sheets to make it look pretty and even make it blink or scroll across a page, because that was hot one day. The problem was, different teams did this, and we said, okay, and kind of left it that way and built all these architectural silos to the individual back-end pieces of data. And then those same organizations had to invest later on in things like enterprise service buses and normalization technology. Well, if we fast forward to today, it looks very similar, except instead of having one common Netscape communicator across the top, now we've got all these different channels across the top, and those channels are growing almost by the day. So if we look at it today and we say, how do we mobilize these business applications to address that time to market challenge, a lot of folks are doing the same thing and saying, okay, well, I'll connect directly to my SAP system or directly to my sales system. And all you're going to do when you do that is have to reinvest in some platform technology, some normalization technology. So we can do it right off the jump if we want to. And how folks are doing that is creating a normalized, standard RESTful API layer across all of these. So then I can at least talk common nouns and verbs. I can at least have a standard way to hit all those disparate backends that we saw in the previous slide. And then on top of those RESTful API layers, we have some mobile SDKs, so I can wrap those APIs up so that I don't even have to worry about how I make calls over in HTTP transport. Instead, I just work with local objects and have the local objects proxy the back-end objects for me and marshal that data over the wire. And then I get cool things like offline support sometimes. So this is how we can normalize and platform that access to the back-end systems and not have to reinvest like we did in the past. We're also starting to see a move away from having bundled UI generation and business logic in the same back-end things. As I said earlier, I used to build a whole lot of servlets, and those servlets had JSPs, and we would actually have front-end folks come in and try to, inject some HTML into the JSPs, and as a back-end guy, I was like, nah, let's stop doing that. Y'all are front-end people, you do your thing, and I'll do my thing, and we'll meet somewhere in the middle. And that caused a lot of problems because as a back-end guy, I was terrible at writing front-end stuff. So that's why things like Node.js have now come along, and so front-end people can start to work all the way down the stack into the back-end as well. That's starting to become, I wouldn't say common, but a whole lot more common than it was 18 months ago. We're seeing rapid growth there. With that in mind, I recently put out my thoughts on what an enterprise architecture should look like to support mobile. I'll show you the eye chart here in a second, but the critical things are why we have each of these tiers in the architecture. Number one, it's got to be a single architecture to support all your platforms. Your customers don't want to go to mobile and have a completely different experience than they have on the web, and then have a different experience that they have on glass, and a different experience that they want to have on their connected device. They want to have a consistent experience with you. It'd be like going to a grocery store and every aisle I go down is like a completely different color scheme, and the way they stock is completely different. It just wouldn't make sense. So it's got to be one architecture for all channels. Number two, the content that you create must be granular. This is a very, very global economy now, and so when you deliver your experiences to that global economy, it has to perform just like if you were in your own data center. So having content go out to Middle America or having content go out to China is a lot different, and oftentimes that comes down to caching, things like CDNs, et cetera. That caching is a whole lot more difficult if you're sending out big chunks of data and hoping that Akamai will just take care of it for you. That's a lot harder sell these days. Third is that architecture must be elastic. You all are very well aware that when you put out an app and it hits, it blows up, and then it comes and goes, but you never know when it's going to happen. So your architecture has to support an elastic model there. And then finally, you've got to be able to update it rapidly. Like I said, you're going to put out a core product and then iterate on it as you get feedback from your customers or through the analytics that you wrap it in. So the back end that you build on has to be able to support that as well. So I've got to be able to push-pull components on my back end, just like I can do it with the componentization of the front end. So I'll rip this away real quick and show that to do that, we've created a 4-tier model that has a services tier at the bottom. And note, it's not a data tier. I am incredibly bullish on a services-oriented architecture, but a modern one. One that uses REST and one that's very granular and supports all these channels. Then an aggregation tier on top of that to aggregate these services into experiences for your user in their time of need. A delivery tier, which does your content optimization over the wire. Traditionally, this is CDNs, but it's also protocol optimizers, things like instart logic, et cetera. And then finally, a client tier that supports all of your clients. And this is the model that we're starting to see a lot of the folks that are on the forward end of that not evenly distributed future do. This is what the Netflix architecture looks like at a high level. This is what LinkedIn looks like at a high level. L'Oreal, worldwide company, this is what they look like at a high level. And then if we look at that aggregation tier, as I said earlier, I believe access to data is going to be the most difficult thing that you do when doing mobile in the enterprise. And so this is kind of what that looks like if we blow it up. So we've got that underlying services, or that underlying systems of record, our ugly back-end systems that support the enterprise. And the first thing that I always advise our clients to do is to create a services API on top of that, and one that's appropriately granular. Now, I can say appropriately granular because I'm an analyst and don't have to build it, but this is an art. It's way more art than it is science. And you'll build APIs and they'll be wrong because they don't perform properly, they don't exactly meet your client's needs. So you'll build them again, and you'll build them again. And then finally, at some point, you'll get them right. So with that in mind, do 2 things. Number 1, learn versioning of APIs very early. Figure that out very quickly. And number 2, make sure that the organization that you're in understands that failure is an opportunity to learn, and one-time failure doesn't mean that it's a project failure. That's a big cultural change that a lot of our folks are going through, but we're starting to see fruits of that. So then once we have this services infrastructure, then we've got the aggregation tier that I talked about earlier, which is how do I aggregate those services dynamically for a request in real time. Generally, these services are hidden behind some type of federated access layer so that I can either have a single URL or maybe a small handful of URLs, so that not only do my developers not have to learn the nastiness of all of these back-end systems, but they also don't have to know where they are. I simply go to my one common API layer and make requests, and this aggregation tier routes them to the proper place. And it also routes through business process APIs, and then I can also inject things like analytics, role-based access, business intelligence, all at one place, and get that across all my channels. And with a model like this, I killed one of my slides. With a model like this in place, now where I used to build apps, now they're simply, monolithic apps, now they're simply compositions of the select set of services and business processes that I need at any given time. And that might literally be per request if you need it. And now, like Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story. This is some interesting things that are a little bit shocking. We do a lot of surveys, and surveys of developers, surveys of development organizations, and we did one and asked them, what kind of quality processes do you use? What kind of testing do you do? And so we asked, do you unit test? And 46% said yes. That's like the minimum level of test. Can you just test your app to see if it works before you put it out? 46% said yes, and if that doesn't scare the pants off you, it sure does me. That's worrisome. But it's true. And what that tells you is that time to market challenge, that rush to get things out to meet the business demands, makes folks that understand a waterfall lifecycle say, well, you wanted it in 3 months. At the end of 3 months, we were done with the development, so here you go. And no lie, that's happening more than we would like to see. The other crazy thing is 31% automate tests. That works. Doing manual testing works with a small handful of apps, but once you get any kind of application portfolio, like we saw with the web, and we'll see it again with mobile, you've got to be able to automate. You've got to be able to automate as much as possible. And the good thing is a lot of tools like the Xamarin Test Cloud are quickly coming around to help us do just that. So definitely take a look at that. With that in mind, I look at mobile in the enterprise. So being the guy that does enterprise mobile development, I get to cheat because I get to watch everything that happens in the consumer world and wait 18 months. And then that starts to appear in the enterprise. And so similarly, when I talk to folks and talk to our clients and ask them things like what kind of testing are you doing and things like that, I actually didn't hear about even functional testing until the first part of 2013. So given that the iPhone came out in 2007, it was 6 years before a number of enterprises got to the point where they wanted to really lay out how we do functional testing of mobile. And only at the end of 2013 did I even hear any words about automation, about even considering it. And I still don't hear about performance testing, continuous monitoring, continuous integration. These are to come. So when I'm asked about, where is the enterprise in the maturity curve in mobile, it's right about where we were with the web when we first started to automate. So we still have a long way to go. But quality does still drive success. You've got to have a quality app. What I did, and this was about the beginning of September here a few weeks ago, what I did was took a look at the top free apps in the Android App Store and tried to figure out, well, why were these the top apps? Why are people rating these so highly, and why do they always seem to float up to the top? Facebook is there because obviously that's, technology crack, and we can't get away from Facebook. But otherwise, what's the commonality here? And the thing that I found was this: these numbers are how long it had been since the most recent update. So only 2 of them, Pandora and a flashlight app, had been more than a month old. There were, a number of apps. Skype, 1 day. Candy Crush, 1 day. Facebook, 1 day. The average of all these, even including the 2 outliers, was 15 days, 15 and a quarter days. So folks are updating their apps. Folks at the top of the app stores are updating their apps about once every 2 weeks. So that's where we need to get to. So with that said, what does all this mean? Number one, quality must move to the left. We've got to have quality early on in your process. I tell folks when I walk into a development shop, I can immediately find out what your priorities are in mobile based on what you're doing in Sprint 2 or Iteration 2, whatever you want to call it. If you're not doing performance tests of any kind there, if you're not doing any kind of quality checking, if you're not doing any kind of automation, then I know those things don't matter to you because we have to do it in this compressed time frame. If you don't do it early, you're not going to do it. So quality needs to move to the left. Performance needs to move to the left. A standardized mechanism of accessing our data needs to move to the left because we can't have all of us, we can't have all of our developers trying to understand every back-end system in our enterprise and learning the nuances of all of that. It just takes time, and time is what we don't have anymore. And then finally, I love this part because I am one. Developers are the most critical business asset. No lie. I don't say that because I am one, and I don't say that one because I'm at a development show. It's a fact. I get at least 1 call a day that I'm on where companies ask me, where can I find them? Where can I find developers? Because we simply don't have enough, and I know we're going to need more. And they're the ones that are really driving innovation and driving our business forward. Literally begging me to find them developers. So the good thing is we're in a great spot. We're not going to go hungry anytime soon. But I'll finish up by saying this. I absolutely love this quote. any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. When I was a kid, I turned on the TV one night, and David Copperfield made the Statue of Liberty disappear. And I sat there and I watched the TV with my mom, and the Statue of Liberty disappeared, and I looked at my mom and she saw that look in my eye, and she was filled with fear because she knew what I was going to say. Mom, I want to be a magician. And my mom was a banker, and she knew that, you got to make money to live, and she knew that magicians don't make money. But the great thing is, I've had the awesome opportunity to become one, because if you look what's on our phones, and you look what we can do in our cars and on our watches, these heads-up displays, if I were to simply take you back 5 years, that would look like magic, like straight-up magic. I have no idea how I drove a car without Waze or without maps. I have no idea. People just sit in traffic and look at each other. And now I get to drive these crazy side streets in Boston that I might die on, but at least I get somewhere. We have this awesome opportunity to create magic. And even in the enterprise, that magic is happening. So I'm absolutely excited for what's to come, excited for what we're doing, and can't wait to help you all out as well. So with that said, I'll say thank you. This is my information. The email is there. I look at it sometimes, but the Twitter is there, and I look at it all the time. So feel free to hit me up if you have any questions about what's going on in the enterprise or mobile, or just want to talk about anything in the world. Love to talk. Thank you. And if anybody has any questions, we can have them.
Yeah, you probably come across ThoughtWorks, who software development, and they're very keen on microservices, and I gather that Netflix could be analyzed in that way. Do you think microservices are a really important trend in this enterprise development sphere?
So the question is, the importance of and growth of microservices. So I am a fan of a granular level of service offering. So in the past, we would have web services with WSDLs, and those WSDLs kind of define, here is this big chunk of data that I'll send you, and you use from it what you will. With mobile, we can't do that. We can't be sending mobile a big data package and only use 10% of it, because as I'm sure you're aware, parsing data burns up a battery real quick. So we need to send data at the right granular level that mobile can use and consume into an experience. So therefore, we need to break down our services into smaller components. Now, when you're creating an API, should you have in mind to create microservices? Probably not. What I tell folks is understand the business requirement that you're creating an API for, and build an API to serve that. Now, if that API needs some content plus has a little bit of transactional work, break those into components of their own, APIs of their own, but don't feel like you have to go down to this fine granularity just because of a microservices trend. Do it at the right level, because at the end of the day, in 3 years, 5 years, our API model in a given company is going to be a striation of APIs, higher order ones that compose lower order ones. So you can always get a little bit smaller if you need to be, and you can always compose a little bit higher if you need to be. But we need to keep in mind what the device needs, what our experience needs, and then focus on that. Anything else?
Hello. My question is around the impact of number of updates or frequency of it on enterprise apps.
Yeah.
Well, I understand for the consumer apps, it's pretty important, keeps you on top of the market, but does it really have direct impact on enterprise apps?
Yeah, so we hear about the consumerization of the enterprise quite a bit, and I'll be honest, that's a nice buzzword. It's not really happening from my purview. So I don't believe that it's as important to have 20 updates a year for enterprise apps, because we simply don't see business processes change that much. So if I'm a salesperson and I have a sales app, we're not changing how you sell that often. We're not changing the back-end system that provides that sales data that often. But with that said, with this model of building a core piece of functionality and then building from that, I'd be shocked if we shouldn't be updating those apps at least 3 to 5 times. An internal B2E app, at least 3 to 5 times a year, simply based on detail that we get back through analytics of the app, of how people are using it, of new opportunities that app might serve, and things like that. So maybe not quite as much, but still not just once a year. Others?
On the fast frequency of the top apps,
Yeah.
is that a quality defect and that's why they're rapidly changing, or is it actual innovation?
Yeah, and great question. And the answer, actually, so I don't have the data here with me, but we did research into just that. And the answer is it actually doesn't matter. So what we found was you can put out an app that is just so-so and put it out there and get 3.5 stars and let it languish, and you'll stay right about that star rating. You can put out a completely junk app, like just junk, and that meets a certain need somewhere, but it's just not a well-built app. If you immediately respond to user feedback and immediately update and address people's questions and respond to them in the public app stores, now that we can do that on the platforms, those apps will rise in star rating and will rise in acceptance much, much faster than a mediocre or well-built app that never gets updated. So if it's defects, if it's new feature function that's being added, the fact that updates are happening, our data shows that that actually matters. Folks want to see that they are being addressed and having their needs met. And so that's one half of the story. The other half is we also see some psychological data that says if you put out updates once every 2 weeks and all it says is bug fix, that starts to get a little bit old. And so that's why we're seeing psychology of folks like Spotify. Spotify puts out their change logs in their app updates that say things like, fact now supports ZHCN locale. Fact now has faster lists. Fiction, dinosaurs love our app. So that they put a little thing like that in there just to get past that bug fix release type thing. So I'd say it's probably a mix of both, but simply updating the app goes a long way towards the acceptance of the app itself. Any others?
How is enterprise mobility shaping up with open source versus licensed product versus hybrid frameworks like AngularJS and closed systems like Xamarin, cross-platform things?
Yeah.
And native especially.
Yeah. So how is the enterprise, working with and using OSS, open source software, as related to things like Xamarin and others? Enterprises, businesses, at the end of the day, want a throat to choke. So if you're building something and the platform you're building it on breaks, they don't want to have to go out to a user group and say, hey, user group, you failed me. What they want is to go to a person at a company and say, we have an SLA, or we have an agreement, or some type of understanding, and you need to help us with that. So we actually see a lot more adoption of things like Xamarin than we do of most OSS. You mentioned one, Angular. Folks are using that. I think our most recent developer survey said 3% of folks are using Angular. jQuery was, there was a good bit of that as well. But the problem that they have is if I want support, I don't have somebody I can point to. And even Angular with Google's backing, you're not going to go to Google and be like, hey, you screwed me. You know what they're going to say. So and the other challenge with OSS is the licensing. There's a lot of companies I walk into that simply say we won't use it because we don't understand all the nuances between the different licensing models and how that might get us in trouble. And we know if we buy something like Xamarin, it's a known quantity, a known good.
I've got one more question. Do you have any stats on what sort of technology enterprises use to build their mobile apps?
I do. Well, I have a breakdown between native apps written in the platform, so Java, Swift, Objective-C, versus hybrid apps versus mobile web. And in the native apps, we include things like Xamarin and Accelerator, and in the hybrid ones we include like PhoneGap, the ones that are built with pure web technologies. The native apps right now, I believe, are 48% of development that develop native that put out native binaries. The mobile web is sitting right around 23%, and the hybrid ones are the rest of that, like another 24, 25. So it tends to be native in one group, and then these other things that kind of add up to the other group right now.
Well, that was largely my question, but I guess the follow-up to that is, which way is that moving and to what degree?
Yeah. So our year-over-year data shows that it's pretty level, and I don't expect that to change a lot. For quite some time, it's died down a little bit now, but for quite some time, at least once every 2 days, I would get the question of what's going to win, mobile web or apps. And then they would break it down between native apps and hybrid apps. That's not a zero-sum game. It's going to be this way for quite some time. I tell folks that there are places to build apps. If you want a curated experience, you want a really, really nice native experience, that's great. There's also a place for the mobile web. That's where discovery happens. So if you're a brand and nobody knows about you, they're not going to find you in the App Store. You need a discovery mechanism where people search. And so the mobile web works there. So it's not a zero-sum game. We're going to need both. We're going to need both for quite some time. But the majority of it is still native.
Do you think glasses is going to be a trend on enterprise apps?
Yeah, will glasses be a trend in enterprise apps? And actually, before I mention that, a lot of folks have left. Don't forget to wear your badges to the Xamarin Southern Barbecue at the depot, at the freight depot. I was supposed to get that in there. Will glasses be a trend in enterprise? Across the board, I would hesitate. I tend to say no, but there are verticals where they're going to be huge and already are starting to make sense. Like I know in hospitals, doctors, things like that. Having patient data, pop up real quick and being able to see that is big. Places like there's like mining operations that have them out in the field, so folks can look at things and do repairs. That's happening. So I think vertical by vertical, you're going to see a lot of spikes in glass. But across the board, it's still tepid at best right now. I don't see big trends for everybody, but more in certain places. Anything else? By the way, it's 5:07. I just let you know I'm not holding you up from beer.
I have the same question for iBeacons.
Yes, iBeacons are blowing up. And beacons of all sorts are really, really blowing up, especially in retail. And the retail model makes sense. That's happening a lot. But we're also seeing it inside the enterprise, like shop floors for inventory management. We're seeing it there. We're seeing it. Those are the two big ones right now: shop floors and inventory management, or shop floors in retail. But I hear about that every single day. You're going to see an explosion this Black Friday, or this year's Black Friday. There's going to be a ton of them out there. And the cool thing is there are now apps, Android, with the BTLE, and iPhone has one as well. There are apps that you can just sit and look to see where there are beacons and where they're coming from. Go, if you're a dev, this is cool stuff. Just go get it and turn it on and walk around places. There's a lot of them already out there. Obviously places like this, but go to the airport, go to a mall. There's a lot of beacons and stuff out there.
You have a name for those applications?
What's that?
Do you have a name for those applications?
So I lump them all under the kind of the IoT connected application type world, which also includes things like Nest and those connected devices. But yeah, we lump it under connected devices. Anything else? Good deal. Well, hey, thanks y'all for coming. I really, really appreciate it. Hit me up if you want.